If your son ever calls after midnight and tells you to hide, do not ask questions. Just move. Those were the words I found myself repeating months later. But on that night, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. My name is Robert Harrison. I am 72 years old, a widower, and until that night, I believed my life had settled into a predictable rhythm. I lived alone in the same Pennsylvania house my wife and I had purchased more than 30 years earlier. Most evenings followed the same pattern. I would make a simple dinner, watch the local news, read for a while, and head to bed before 11. Nothing exciting ever happened in my neighborhood. That is why the ringing phone startled me awake. I opened my eyes and looked toward the clock on my nightstand. 12:17 a.m. For a moment, I considered letting the call go to voicemail. Then I saw the name on the screen. Michael, my oldest son. Michael worked for the FBI. He never called at that hour unless something was seriously wrong. I answered immediately. Michael. What happened next still echoes in my mind. His voice was low, controlled, and more serious than I had ever heard it. Dad, do not turn on any lights. My heart instantly began to race. What is going on? I asked. He ignored the question. Listen carefully. Go to the attic right now. Stay quiet. Take your phone with you. Do not call anyone. Do you understand? I sat upright in bed. Michael, tell me what is happening. There was a brief pause. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. I am on my way. I will explain when I get there. Just trust me and do exactly what I said. Before I could ask another question, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. For several seconds I remained frozen. Every instinct told me to call him back. Every instinct told me to turn on the lights and look outside. But something in his voice stopped me. Michael was not a man who panicked. If he sounded that serious, there had to be a reason. I slipped out of bed and moved through the dark house. The silence felt different somehow. Heavier. I grabbed a flashlight, but did not switch it on. Then I headed toward the narrow attic ladder in the hallway closet. Climbing into that attic felt ridiculous. Part of me kept expecting the phone to ring again with an explanation. It never did. Once inside, I carefully lowered the hatch and settled into the darkness among old boxes and holiday decorations. Dust floated through the faint moonlight coming from a small attic vent. I checked the time. 12:24 a.m. 7 minutes had passed since the call. I listened. Nothing. Then, several minutes later, I heard something outside. A vehicle. Not driving past. Stopping. My pulse quickened. Through the vent, I could see a small portion of my driveway. Headlights briefly illuminated the front yard before going dark. Someone had arrived. I held my breath. The house remained silent. Then I heard a sound from below. A faint click. Not loud. Not dramatic. But unmistakable. It sounded like a key turning inside a lock. Someone was entering my house. And whoever it was apparently believed they had every right to be there. Every muscle in my body locked in place. From the attic, I listened as footsteps moved slowly through the first floor of my house. Whoever had entered was not rushing. They were not searching randomly. They seemed to know exactly where they were going. The sound traveled from the hallway toward my study. My study. Of all the rooms in the house, that was the one place containing decades of personal records, financial documents, and family paperwork. I pulled out my phone and checked the screen. No new messages from Michael. No missed calls. Just silence. I considered calling him, but I remembered his warning. Stay quiet. Trust me. Minutes passed like hours. Then I heard drawers opening below. Papers shifting. File cabinets moving. The person was definitely looking for something specific. My heart pounded so hard I was certain it could be heard through the ceiling. Through the small attic vent, I tried to see more of the driveway. The vehicle remained parked near the curb with its lights off. I could not make out the license plate. I could barely make out the shape. Whoever was down there had planned this carefully. Suddenly my phone vibrated. I nearly dropped it. A text message from Michael appeared. Are you still in the attic? I replied immediately. Yes. Someone is inside. 3 dots appeared. Then another message arrived. Do not move. Whatever happens, do not come downstairs. I stared at the screen. My fingers trembled. What is going on? A full minute passed before his reply arrived. Longer than any minute I had ever experienced. Then the message appeared. Dad, the person downstairs may be looking for documents connected to your identity. My identity. The words made no sense. Before I could ask another question, another text appeared. I think someone has been using your name. A chill ran through me despite the warm summer air trapped in the attic. Using my name for what? Michael did not answer immediately. Instead, a new message appeared. I am 5 minutes away. Stay hidden. I looked around the attic. Old Christmas decorations. Boxes of photographs. My late wife's sewing supplies. 40 years of memories surrounded me while complete confusion consumed my mind. Using my name. The phrase kept repeating inside my head. I had never been involved in anything remotely suspicious. My life had been painfully ordinary. After retiring from my accounting job, I spent most days gardening, volunteering at church events, and visiting family. The idea that someone would use my identity for anything seemed absurd. Then another sound came from below. This time it was louder. A cabinet door closing, followed by footsteps returning through the hallway. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped directly beneath the attic. For several terrifying seconds, there was no movement at all. I could almost feel someone standing there listening, waiting, thinking. My grip tightened around the phone. Then the footsteps resumed and moved away toward the front of the house. Moments later, I heard the front door open and close. Silence returned. Complete silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. Then headlights flashed through the attic vent. Another vehicle entered the driveway. A familiar vehicle. Michael's government-issued SUV. Relief washed over me, so suddenly I nearly laughed. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. I answered immediately. Michael spoke before I could say a word. His voice sounded even more serious than before. Dad, stay exactly where you are. I just found something outside that changes everything. And if I am right, the person who was inside your house tonight is someone we both know. For several seconds I could not speak. I remained crouched in the attic, staring into the darkness while Michael's words echoed through my mind. Someone we both know. The statement was somehow more frightening than the idea of a stranger. Strangers are unpredictable. Family comes with memories, trust, and assumptions. Michael, I finally said, keeping my voice low. Who are you talking about? There was a pause on the line. I do not know yet, he replied. Not for certain. That is why I need you to stay calm and listen carefully. I heard a car door close outside. Michael was moving around the property. I found tire impressions near the side of the house, and something else, he continued. The person who came here tonight knew exactly where to park, so they would not be visible from the road. They also knew which entrance to use. My stomach tightened. You think it was somebody in the family. I think it was somebody familiar with your routines. The distinction mattered. Many people knew where I lived. Very few knew how I lived. Michael instructed me to remain in the attic until he entered the house and checked every room. 10 minutes later, I heard him call my name from downstairs. Only then did I carefully climb down. The house looked exactly as I had left it. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared missing. Yet something felt different. Michael stood in my study holding a folder from my filing cabinet. His expression immediately told me this was not a misunderstanding. Dad, he said quietly, when was the last time you looked through these records? I frowned. A few months ago, maybe. What? Instead of answering, he handed me several documents. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Then I noticed signatures. My signatures. At least they appeared to be mine. The problem was that I had never signed those papers. I stared at them in disbelief. What is this? Michael pulled out another document. Then another. Every page contained personal information connected to me. Addresses, account numbers, property references, authorization forms. None of them were familiar. We have been investigating a financial fraud network for almost 8 months, Michael explained. Several identities were being used to move assets and create false ownership trails. I looked at him blankly. What does that have to do with me? He took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, your name appeared in the investigation. The room suddenly felt colder. My name? Yes. Michael sat down across from me. At first, we thought it might be coincidence. Then more records appeared. More transactions. More documents. He pointed toward the paperwork in my hands. Tonight confirmed something. Somebody was looking for information connected to those records. I lowered myself into a chair. Nothing made sense. I had spent my entire career working with numbers. Accuracy mattered to me. Organization mattered to me. The idea that someone had quietly inserted my identity into a criminal scheme felt impossible. Yet the documents were sitting right in front of me. Why did you not tell me sooner? I asked. Michael looked uncomfortable. Because I hoped I was wrong. That answer hurt more than I expected. My son had spent weeks investigating something connected to me and never said a word. Then again, If he had warned me too early, I might have done something foolish. We sat in silence for several moments. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since the phone call. Do you think I am in danger? Michael immediately shook his head. No, I think somebody needs your identity. That is different. Somehow that answer was not reassuring. Michael gathered the documents and placed them back into the folder. Dad, there is one more thing. I looked up. His expression had changed again. More serious. More uncertain. What? He hesitated before speaking. The names connected to these records keep appearing around people who already know our family. I felt a chill move through me. What are you saying? Michael looked directly into my eyes. I think this started much closer to home than either of us wants to believe. I barely slept for the remainder of that night. After Michael left, I sat alone at my kitchen table watching the first light of dawn creep across the backyard. The folder remained in front of me. Every few minutes I found myself opening it again, hoping the documents would somehow make more sense. They never did. By sunrise, one fact had become impossible to ignore. Someone had spent a considerable amount of time building a false paper trail around my identity. That was not an accident. It was a plan. Later that morning, Michael returned carrying a box of records he had collected from public filings and investigation reports. We spread everything across my dining room table. Page after page revealed details that should never have existed. Properties I had never visited. Accounts I had never opened. Authorizations I had never approved. Yet my name appeared everywhere. Who benefits from this? I finally asked. Michael leaned back in his chair. That is the question we have been trying to answer. He pointed to several highlighted sections. The people behind this are not stealing money directly. They are creating ownership confusion. I frowned. Why? Because confusion buys time, he replied. And time allows people to move assets without attracting attention. The explanation sounded logical, but it did not explain why my identity had been chosen. I was a retired widower living a quiet life. There were thousands of easier targets. Michael seemed to read my thoughts. We think your name was selected because of your reputation. My reputation? You have good credit history. Clean records. No legal problems. No financial disputes. People trust paperwork connected to you. Hearing my life summarized that way felt strange. For 72 years, I had simply tried to do the right thing. Now those same qualities appeared to have made me useful to someone else. Over the next several days, Michael and I began reviewing old family records. At first, we focused on obvious possibilities. Former business contacts, distant relatives, people who had temporary access to my files over the years. None of those paths led anywhere. Then something unusual appeared. A property transfer document from nearly 4 years earlier contained an address I recognized immediately. Not because I had ever lived there, because I had visited it many times. Michael noticed my reaction. What is it? I pointed to the address. This place belongs to someone connected to our family. Michael looked down at the paper. His expression changed instantly. He recognized it too. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence itself felt like an answer. That cannot be a coincidence, I finally said. No, Michael agreed quietly. I do not think it is. We spent the rest of the afternoon tracing every reference connected to that address. The deeper we looked, the more connections appeared. None of them proved guilt. None of them revealed a complete picture. But together they formed a pattern. And patterns rarely lie. That evening, after Michael left, I walked through my house thinking about trust. Trust is a strange thing. Most people imagine it breaking all at once. In reality, it usually breaks in reverse. First, small questions appear. Then doubts. Then uncomfortable possibilities. Finally, one day, you realize the person you trusted might not be the person you thought they were. Around 9 o'clock that night, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice sounded different. More controlled. More careful. Dad, he said, I need you to prepare yourself. My stomach tightened immediately. For what? There was a pause. Tomorrow I am going to show you a list of names connected to this investigation. And another pause. Longer this time. One of those names belongs to someone in our family. The next morning arrived far too quickly. I barely touched my breakfast. Every time I looked at the clock, I found myself wondering which name Michael had discovered and how close that person might be to our family. By 10 o'clock, his SUV pulled into my driveway. The moment he stepped inside, I knew the news was bad. Michael was usually careful about showing emotion, but that morning his face carried a weight I had rarely seen before. We sat at the dining room table where the documents still covered nearly every surface. He placed a thin folder in front of me, but kept his hand on top of it. "Before you look," he said, "I need you to understand something." My stomach tightened. "Go ahead. Nothing in here proves criminal intent." "Not yet. What it proves is access." I frowned. "Access to what?" "Your information. Your records. Your trust." The last word landed harder than the others. Slowly, Michael removed his hand from the folder. I opened it. Inside were copies of emails, property references, account inquiries, and communication logs. At first, the names meant nothing. Then I reached the final page. The name sitting near the center stopped me cold. Daniel Harrison, my younger son. For several seconds, I simply stared at the paper. The letters did not change. They did not rearrange themselves into another name. They remained exactly where they were. Daniel Harrison. "No," I said quietly. "That cannot be right." Michael did not respond immediately. I thought the same thing. My mind immediately filled with memories. Daniel as a child learning to ride a bicycle. Daniel graduating from college. Daniel standing beside me at his mother's funeral. Whatever explanation existed, it could not possibly involve him intentionally harming me. "There has to be another reason," I said. "Maybe someone used his information too." Michael nodded slowly. "That is possible, which is why I have not reached any final conclusions." I looked up. "Then why show me this?" He leaned forward. "Because Daniel's name appears repeatedly around the records connected to your identity. Not once, not twice, repeatedly." The room felt strangely quiet. Outside, birds moved through the trees. Cars passed on the road. Ordinary life continued while my understanding of my own family shifted beneath my feet. Michael began showing me timelines. For years of connections, property filings, access records, financial references. None of them directly accused Daniel of anything, but together they painted a troubling picture. Daniel had been unusually close to several people already connected to the investigation. He had also visited my house more frequently than anyone else during the exact period when documents appeared to have been copied. "Why did nobody notice this before?" I asked. Michael gave a sad smile. "Because nobody was looking." That answer made perfect sense. Families rarely investigate one another. Trust fills in the gaps where questions should exist. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Daniel had always been the son who needed extra help, extra advice, extra support. After his business struggled several years earlier, I had helped him recover. When unexpected expenses appeared, I had been there. I never kept score because that is what parents do. Yet now I found myself wondering whether my willingness to help had also given him opportunities. Not opportunities to hurt me. I still could not believe that. But opportunities to access things nobody else could reach. Michael eventually closed the folder. "Dad, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Do not confront Daniel." I looked at him in disbelief. "You think my son may be connected to this, and you do not want me talking to him?" "Not yet," Michael replied. "If we are wrong, we damage the family for nothing. If we are right, we warn someone who does not know we are paying attention." I hated that logic because it was impossible to argue with. As Michael prepared to leave, he stopped at the door. "There is one more thing." I looked up. "What now?" His expression hardened. "Last night was not the first time someone entered your house when you were not home. According to what we uncovered this morning, it may have been happening for years." For the next several days, I found myself looking at my own home differently. Every room carried memories, yet now those memories competed with uncomfortable questions. If Michael was right, someone had been entering my house for years without my knowledge. Someone who knew where important documents were kept. Someone who understood my routines. Someone who never expected to be questioned. The worst part was not fear. It was uncertainty. I still could not accept that Daniel would intentionally harm me. Every instinct fought against that conclusion. Yet every new piece of information pushed me closer to a reality I did not want to face. Michael called almost every evening. Sometimes we discussed new findings. Other times we simply talked through possibilities. He remained careful not to accuse anyone directly. That restraint was one of the few things keeping me grounded. Then, 4 days after our conversation, Michael arrived with a plan. "We need to stop reacting," he said as he entered my kitchen. "We need to start observing." I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. "What exactly does that mean?" He opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. Most were ordinary images of my property. Driveway, front porch, Side entrance. Backyard gate. Whoever is involved believes they still have access, Michael explained. That confidence can work in our favor. I studied the photographs. You want to catch them coming back. Not catch them, he corrected. Understand them. The distinction mattered. Michael was not interested in creating a confrontation. He wanted evidence. Patterns. Certainty. Over the next week, several subtle changes appeared around the house. New document storage locations. Updated locks on certain cabinets. Small indicators placed in places nobody should notice unless they were searching. Nothing illegal. Nothing dangerous. Just quiet ways of learning whether someone continued accessing areas they should not be accessing. Then something happened. On a Wednesday afternoon, Daniel called unexpectedly. At first, the conversation seemed completely normal. He asked about my health. He asked whether I needed help with yard work. He asked whether I planned to travel during the coming month. None of those questions were unusual by themselves. What felt unusual was how specific they became. You still keep most of your paperwork at home, right? He asked casually. The question immediately caught my attention. Some of it, I replied. Why? There was a brief pause. No reason. I was just curious. Curious. The word lingered in my mind long after the call ended. That evening, I told Michael about the conversation. He listened carefully. Did he ask anything else? A few questions about my schedule. Michael wrote several notes. Then he looked up. Dad, do not change your behavior. Why? Because if somebody is paying attention, we want them to believe everything is normal. The strategy made sense. Even so, I hated it. Every conversation now felt like it contained hidden meanings. Every family interaction carried new uncertainty. Then came the breakthrough. 2 nights later, one of the indicators Michael had placed inside a locked filing cabinet showed signs of disturbance. Nothing had been taken. Nothing appeared damaged. Yet someone had definitely accessed the cabinet. The problem was that only a handful of people even knew it existed. Michael arrived shortly after midnight to inspect everything. We stood in my study reviewing the evidence. This confirms it, he said quietly. Somebody is still searching for specific records. What records? I asked. Michael looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. It was the look of someone finally seeing a larger picture emerge. I do not think they are looking for money anymore. My stomach tightened. Then what are they looking for? He picked up one of the folders from the cabinet and held it in his hand. I think they are looking for something that could make you responsible for everything. Michael's words stayed with me long after he left that night. Somebody was not trying to steal from me anymore. Somebody was trying to make it appear that I was responsible. The difference changed everything. For the first time since this ordeal began, I understood why my identity had been used so carefully. If enough false records pointed toward me, then eventually every question would lead back to my name. The real architect could disappear while I carried the blame. The following week became a turning point. Michael and his team quietly expanded their review of the records connected to my identity. They stopped looking only at financial documents and began examining communications, access logs, property visits, and timelines. The results were disturbing. Every path seemed to circle back to the same small group of people. And one name continued appearing closer to the center than anyone wanted to admit. Daniel. Even then, I refused to believe the worst. I kept searching for an innocent explanation. Maybe he trusted the wrong people. Maybe he signed documents without understanding them. Maybe someone had manipulated him. A father can invent 1,000 excuses when he loves his child. Unfortunately, facts do not care about excuses. 3 days later, Michael arrived carrying another folder. Unlike previous meetings, he did not sit down immediately. He placed the folder on the table and looked out the kitchen window for several seconds before speaking. Dad, we finally understand what happened. My stomach tightened. Tell me. He opened the folder. Inside were timelines stretching back nearly 5 years. Names, dates, property references, email records, everything arranged in chronological order. For the first time, the entire picture was visible. Someone had systematically used my identity to create legitimacy for transactions and ownership transfers involving multiple assets. Whenever questions appeared, new paperwork surfaced connecting everything back to me. Not directly enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but consistently enough to build a future narrative. A narrative in which I appeared responsible. This was never about taking your money, Michael said. Your reputation was the real target. I stared at the pages. Why would anyone need that? Because your reputation opened doors. People trusted documents connected to you. Banks trusted them. Agencies trusted them. Business partners trusted them. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Everything I had spent decades building had become a tool for someone else. Then Michael showed me the final section. Several communications linked individuals already under investigation to meetings and transactions involving Daniel. The evidence still did not prove criminal intent beyond all doubt, but it destroyed the possibility of coincidence. Daniel had been involved far more deeply than I had imagined. I felt a mixture of sadness and disbelief. Did he know? I asked quietly. Michael answered honestly. We cannot prove what he knew, but we can prove what he participated in. Those words stayed with me. Participated in. Not suspected. Not connected to. Participated in. Later that evening, Michael and I reviewed one final discovery. During the previous month, someone had attempted to locate specific records that would complete the false trail pointing toward me. The search matched the activity we had detected inside my house. Whoever entered that night was not gathering information. They were looking for the last missing piece. Fortunately, they never found it, because the document they needed had already been moved years earlier. The next morning, Michael called with news that changed everything again. Additional records had surfaced overnight. Not rumors. Not theories. Actual evidence. Enough evidence to finally force the truth into the open. For the first time since that midnight phone call, certainty had replaced suspicion. I sat quietly at my kitchen table listening as Michael explained what had been uncovered. When he finished, neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. What happens now? Michael exhaled slowly. Now, he said, the entire family is going to learn the truth. The family gathering took place 3 days later at my house. On the surface, everything appeared normal. The dining room table was set. Coffee was brewing in the kitchen. Familiar voices filled the rooms. Yet beneath the ordinary atmosphere sat a truth that was finally ready to emerge. Michael arrived early and helped me organize several folders on the dining room table. Neither of us spoke much. There was nothing left to debate. The evidence had already answered every important question. By noon, everyone had arrived. My daughter, her husband, several grandchildren, and finally Daniel. He walked through the front door carrying the same easy smile I had seen my entire life. For a moment, I almost wished we could return to the days before any of this began. Then I remembered the documents. The late-night visit. The years of deception surrounding my identity. Reality returned. We shared a meal first. I wanted nobody to feel ambushed. I wanted every person in that room to know they had been treated fairly. After lunch, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. The conversations faded. Chairs shifted. Curious expressions appeared around the table. Michael remained seated beside me. Daniel looked slightly confused but relaxed. There is something important we need to discuss, I began. My voice surprised me. It sounded calm, stronger than I expected. Over the past several weeks, Michael and I have learned that my identity has been used in ways I never authorized. Silence settled across the room. Several relatives exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel's smile disappeared. I continued carefully. At first, I believed this involved strangers. Then we discovered connections much closer to home. Nobody interrupted. Michael opened one of the folders and placed several documents on the table. He explained only the facts. Dates, records, property filings, communication histories. No accusations. No emotional speeches. Just evidence. One document led to another. One timeline connected to the next. Gradually, the room began understanding the pattern. Daniel's posture changed. He no longer looked comfortable. He looked worried. Finally, he spoke. What exactly are you saying? His voice sounded defensive but uncertain. Michael answered before I could. We are saying that your name appears repeatedly in activities connected to the misuse of Dad's identity. Daniel immediately shook his head. That does not prove anything. No, Michael agreed. By itself, it does not. Then he opened the final folder. The room became completely silent. Inside were records discovered only days earlier. Unlike the previous documents, these provided direct context for decisions that had been made over several years. They revealed who had access, who had communicated with key individuals, who had benefited from arrangements connected to the false paperwork. Daniel stared at the pages for a long time. Nobody spoke. Nobody pressured him. Eventually, he lowered his eyes. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no threats, no chaos. There was only a man confronting consequences he could no longer avoid. "I never thought it would reach this point," he said quietly. The words hit me harder than any denial could have. Not because they answered every question, but because they confirmed what I had spent months refusing to believe. Daniel admitted that he had allowed himself to become involved with people promising solutions to financial problems. At first, he convinced himself nobody would be harmed. Then each compromise led to another. Small decisions became larger ones. And eventually my identity became part of a plan he no longer controlled. Tears appeared in several eyes around the table, mine included, not because money was involved, not because records had been altered, because trust had been damaged. Yet even in that painful moment, something important changed. The truth was no longer hidden. The burden of uncertainty disappeared. As the room sat in silence, Daniel looked toward me and asked a question I never expected to hear. "Dad, is there any way to make this right?" For a long moment, nobody spoke after Daniel asked his question. The room remained completely silent except for the faint sound of the clock on the wall. I looked at my younger son and saw something I had not seen in a very long time. Not confidence, not excuses, not defensiveness. I saw regret, real regret, the kind that arrives only when someone finally stops running from the truth. I took a slow breath before answering. Making it right starts with honesty. Daniel lowered his eyes and nodded. What followed was not a single conversation. It was a process. Over the next several months, every unanswered question was addressed. Every document was reviewed. Every false record connected to my identity was corrected through proper legal channels. Michael continued helping coordinate the process, not as an FBI agent, but as a son protecting his father. The work was slow. Some days felt frustrating. Other days felt exhausting. Yet for the first time since that midnight phone call, we were moving toward solutions instead of mysteries. One lesson became clear very quickly. The greatest damage had never been financial. The greatest damage had been emotional. Trust, once broken, does not instantly return because someone apologizes. It returns through consistent actions repeated over time. Daniel seemed to understand that. He stopped making excuses. He stopped minimizing what had happened. Instead, he focused on responsibility. Whenever difficult conversations occurred, he participated in them. Whenever questions arose, he answered them directly. Whenever repairs needed to be made, he helped make them. Gradually, the atmosphere inside our family began changing. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily. One afternoon several months later, I found myself sitting on my back porch with Michael. The sun was setting beyond the trees. We had not spoken much for several minutes. Finally, I looked at him and smiled. "You know," I said, "if you had not called that night, I probably would still have no idea any of this happened." Michael laughed softly. "That is exactly why I called." I shook my head. "You told me to hide in the attic without any explanation. And you listened." I still cannot believe I listened. For the first time in months, the memory made both of us laugh. The tension that had dominated our lives for so long finally seemed distant. Michael grew serious again. "Dad, there is something else you should know." I raised an eyebrow. "What now?" He smiled. "Nothing bad. I am proud of how you handled all of this." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. Throughout the investigation, I often felt powerless. Yet hearing that from my oldest son reminded me of something important. Strength does not always mean fighting. Sometimes strength means staying calm while the truth reveals itself. The following Christmas, our family gathered once again around the same dining room table. The atmosphere could not have been more different from the gathering, where everything came into the open. Conversations felt lighter. Laughter returned naturally. Old tensions no longer controlled the room. At one point, I looked around the table and realized how close we had come to losing all of this. Not because of money, not because of documents, because secrecy had nearly replaced trust. Later that evening, Daniel approached me while everyone else was distracted. "Dad," he said quietly, "thank you for giving me a chance to earn my way back." I looked at him for several seconds before answering. "You earned that chance yourself when you chose honesty." His eyes filled with emotion. Mine probably did too. As I stood there surrounded by family, I thought back to the frightened man hiding in an attic months earlier. He believed his life was falling apart. What he did not know was that the truth was about to save it. Sometimes justice does not arrive through revenge. Sometimes the greatest payback is refusing to let deception define your future. And sometimes a midnight phone call becomes the beginning of everything being set right.